My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eyes the day after my husband's funeral and said, "You'll get nothing from his $99 million." A week later, I sat at the will reading her smile wide enough to cut through the silence, certain she had erased me from his life for good. But when the lawyer stopped mid-sentence, put the papers down, and laughed, I knew something she didn't. My husband had left one final move she never saw coming. The kind that doesn't just divide fortunes, but reveals who's truly loyal when love turns into currency. Before I share my story, I'd love to know you are here with me and listening to me. Comment hi below or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes knowing someone is there makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If stories like mine touch something in you, stories about loss, betrayal, and quiet strength, please consider subscribing. I'm Evangeline Kerrigan, and this is how a woman who was written off the will found her name written in the truth instead. I remember the way sunlight slid across the old oak table that morning, glinting off polished brass and cold porcelain cups no one had touched. The conference room smelled like printer ink and coffee gone stale. Nathan Lowell, our family's attorney for 3 decades, sat at the head of the table with his reading glasses low on his nose. My daughter-in-law, Aurelia Sloan, sat beside him, back straight, manicured hands folded neatly. A smile faint but sharp enough to draw blood. I wore black, the same dress from the funeral, my palms still dry from grief. My pulse steady, only because I refused to let her see me break. When Nathan began to read, the words seemed to move through water. Property divisions, investment accounts, business shares, each line fell like a slow drip. And then it came. To my daughter-in-law, Aurelia Sloan, I entrust full control of the Kerrigan-Myers Foundation, along with all financial holdings, personal assets, and real estate. There was no mention of my name. Not once. My husband's handwriting, the man whose heartbeat I had fallen asleep to for 40 years, had been reduced to cold legal syntax that erased me entirely. I didn't cry. There were no tears left. I just stared at the sunlight trembling on the edge of the table and thought, so this is how erasure sounds quiet and precise. Aurelia crossed her legs, smiled slightly wider, and leaned back in her chair like a queen settling into her throne. Around us, the other witnesses murmured polite condolences, avoiding my gaze. I might as well have been invisible. Then, just as Nathan reached the end, something changed. He stopped mid-sentence, brow furrowing as he flipped through the stack of pages again. He murmured, tracing a line with his finger. Clause E. 12. Interesting. Aurelia's posture stiffened only for a second, but I saw it. Nathan's mouth curved, not a smirk, but a knowing smile. Your husband was a cautious man, he said softly. He added a safety clause. Aurelia's lips parted. Excuse me, Clause E12. Nathan continued adjusting his glasses. In the event of any suspected coercion or forged amendments, all distributions are to be suspended pending authentication. Essentially, the document must verify itself. He looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time all morning. He was wiser than most. The room fell silent. Aurelia's smile faltered. Her knuckles whitened on the table's edge. I couldn't tell if it was fear or fury, but something beneath that calm exterior cracked. She gathered her papers, muttering about efficiency, and excused herself before anyone else could speak. I sat still for a long time after everyone had left, the late morning sun now slicing through the blinds. $99 million gone on paper. But I knew my husband. He didn't play by paper. He played by trust, by meaning, by small, hidden gestures that no lawyer could decode. As I walked out into the harsh Santa Fe light, the dry wind whipping through my hair, I felt the faintest whisper of certainty. He left something behind for me, just not in the bank. That night, I lay awake in the empty bed, my hand on the cool pillow where Charles's warmth used to linger. I thought of Nathan's smile, that flicker of irony in his voice. He was a cautious man. Maybe that was his way of telling me, the story isn't over yet. The house on the northern ridge of Santa Fe felt like a mausoleum of unfinished conversations. Every creak of the cedar floorboards sounded like his cane tapping against the hallway. The walls still smelled of tobacco and pine oil, the mixture Charles used to rub into his old desk. I hadn't been able to enter his study since the funeral, but that afternoon when the wind picked up and the house moaned with it, I forced myself to. The room looked untouched, as if time itself had paused the day he left. His books lined the shelves in uneven stacks, some half-open, others marked with folded receipts. A half-finished letter sat in the typewriter, the ribbon dried out. The clock on the wall ticked with stubborn insistence, every sound echoing the same thought: he was here. I sat down at his desk, tracing my fingers along the surface scarred by decades of ink stains. For a while, I just listened to the ticking to the wind, to the silence that filled every space his voice once did. Then I pulled open the top drawer. Inside was a small yellow envelope sealed my name, written on it in his unmistakable, looping script. My throat tightened. The paper was brittle, the ink faint. "If you find this, Evie." It began. "It means you've seen something that doesn't feel right. You're not imagining it. Look inside the kitchen wall between the cedar panels. You'll find what they can't erase, and you'll know you're not crazy." I stared at the handwriting until it blurred. My fingers shook as I folded the letter back into its envelope, then went straight to the kitchen. The evening light filtered through the high window, painting the adobe walls a dull orange. I grabbed a screwdriver and started prying at the seam between two wooden panels above the counter. The smell of dust and cedar hit me as one board came loose. Behind it, tucked carefully inside a plastic sleeve, was a folded blueprint and a handwritten page. It was the founding document of the Kerrigan-Myers Foundation, the one Aurelia claimed sole control over. 2 signatures at the bottom, Charles Kerrigan and Evangeline Kerrigan. My breath caught. At the corner, someone had circled a line in red ink. "Legacy is shared, not replaced." That was his handwriting, shaky but deliberate. And beneath the ink, faint smudges of printer toner, something Charles never used. He hated printers. He always wrote by hand. That meant someone else had handled this, copied it, maybe rewritten parts of it. I sank onto the floor, the document trembling in my lap. A gust of wind rattled the window, and for a second, I could almost hear his voice, calm, amused, steady. "If they try to rewrite, you make them read again." I stayed there until the light faded. Then I put everything back exactly where I found it sealed behind the cedar panel and whispered, "I'll find out, Charles. I'll find out what she did." Outside, the desert sky deepened into a dark indigo, and the coyotes began to howl from somewhere down the valley. In that haunting quiet, I swore I heard a faint tapping, as if someone somewhere was knocking softly to remind me the dead don't rest until the truth does. Sedona had always been Charles's refuge. He said the Red Canyons made him feel small enough to be humble and alive enough to believe in second chances. Driving down the winding desert road alone, I thought about the irony of a man who found peace here, while his legacy was being rewritten somewhere else. The late sun burned across the cliffs like embers. I checked into a small motel near Main Street, the kind with desert dust on the windowsills and a coffee machine that hadn't worked since the Reagan era. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here for answers. Dr. Dean Harrow's clinic sat at the edge of town, a squat adobe building that smelled faintly of antiseptic and cedar oil. When I walked in, he looked up from his desk, recognition flickering across his eyes. "Mrs. Kerrigan," he said softly. "I was wondering when you'd come." He gestured for me to sit. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a manila folder. "I kept these because something didn't feel right after your husband passed. Inside were medical records, Charles's name printed in neat black type, the dates circled. 2 weeks before the signing of the new will, he explained he'd lost voluntary control of his right hand. We had to record it for dosage documentation, morphine twice daily. He paused, watching my reaction. I'm sorry, but even if someone had guided his hand, the signature wouldn't have been legally valid. His motor function was compromised and his mental awareness fluctuated. He showed me a physician's note stamped and signed, dated exactly 13 days before the will's alleged signing. This document alone could reopen everything he said quietly. I thanked him and stepped out into the dry, hot wind. The air smelled of iron and sagebrush. My husband's name was on a paper somewhere written by hands that weren't his, while his own body could barely lift a pen. The thought hollowed me. Down the street, a cafe called the Red Earth Roaster glowed with low yellow light. That's where I met Harper Ruiz, a journalist Nathan had once mentioned in passing. She'd done stories on trust fraud and probate scams. She was younger than I expected, sharp eyes, dark curls tied back, a leather notebook always open. I've been following your daughter-in-law's firm, she said, stirring her coffee. Aurelia hired a consultancy named Cypress and Wren a month before the will update. On paper, they restructured philanthropic trusts. In reality, they moved money offshore. Bermuda, the Cayman's places, with sunlight and no questions. She flipped her notebook toward me. A printed spreadsheet of wire transfers filled the page, $3.5 million from the Kerrigan-Myers Foundation, labeled Preservation Allocation. It's classic misdirection, Harper said. They label it like environmental funding, but the routing code ends in a private investment account. I felt my stomach twist, and the timing, she nodded. A week before your husband's death. Then she hesitated. There's something else. I obtained an internal email thread from a source at Aurelia's law office sender, listed as R. Sloan. It reads, remove co-beneficiary privileges per revision. Proceed before Clause E12 activation. Clause E12 again. The safety net Charles had built, the one she thought she could quietly cut through. I sat back, the cafe's chatter fading to static in my ears. Charles must have known she'd try something. He'd left me that clause as his final defense. As the sun fell behind the canyons, the light shifted to deep orange like smoke suspended in air. I stood outside the cafe, clutching the copies Harper had given me. Somewhere between the wind and the dying light, I could almost hear Charles whisper, "It's all there, Evie. You just have to look where they think you won't." When I drove out of Sedona that night, the road shimmered with heat rising from the earth, and I understood what I had to do. Clause E12 wasn't just a line of ink. It was the key to everything. Denver looked colder than I remembered, glass towers, blue light, and the kind of wind that made everything feel temporary. I arrived at the law offices of Cortez and Lowell early, clutching the Sedona files to my chest. Nathan greeted me at reception, his face weary but kind. "She's ready for you," he said, motioning toward the conference room. Nadia Cortez was younger than I expected, calm, sharp, every word measured. Her desk was a field of color-coded folders, yellow tabs for pending motions, blue for probate cases. When I told her everything from Charles's decline to the forged transfers, she listened without interrupting. Then she said, "We'll start with digital forensics. If Aurelia altered that, it'll leave fingerprints." Within 48 hours, Nadia's team retrieved a server backup from Aurelia's firm. She called me in late one evening, her voice taut with something between triumph and disbelief. "You might want to see this yourself." On her screen, a metadata panel glowed in pale gray. "File modified Sunday 8:04 p.m. It read, "User Aurelia S." Nathan leaned over her shoulder. "Law offices don't work Sundays," he muttered. "And certainly not after hours." His voice carried a quiet satisfaction, the kind born from seeing a lie start to crumble. Nadia clicked another tab. "Here's the internal email." The subject line, "Estate adjustment." The message, "Remove co-beneficiary privileges per revision." She looked up at me. This confirms she manually deleted your name from the estate records. It's direct." My chest tightened, not from shock, but from clarity. For the first time since Santa Fe, the fog in my mind lifted. So it wasn't grief or paranoia, I said. It was her. "She used your silence," Nadia replied gently, "and now we'll use her precision." By the next morning, she had filed for an emergency motion with the Denver court to freeze all assets under the Kerrigan-Myers Foundation pending investigation. The paperwork was relentless, but Nathan's steady hand guided me through every line. The following day, Aurelia struck back. A courier arrived at my door with a thick envelope embossed with her firm's seal. Inside was a legal notice accusing me of emotional instability, following bereavement and requesting a psychiatric evaluation before any hearing. Reading it felt like swallowing ice. She wasn't just attacking my credibility, she was dismantling my sanity on paper. I called Nathan, voice trembling. "She's calling me unstable." He sighed. That's how people like her operate. They turn the victim into the distraction. Let Nadia handle the rest. But that night, as I stared at the snow falling beyond my apartment window, I knew waiting wasn't enough. Somewhere, someone had been in that office on the Sunday when Charles's name was stolen from his own will. Someone had seen it happen, or at least signed off on it. And I was going to find them. The next morning, Nadia called to say the court had approved the asset freeze. Aurelia's accounts were locked pending review. For the first time, I felt air fill my lungs without burning. I stepped out of the office and into the Denver street. The wind cut across my face, cold but alive. People hurried by, heads down briefcases, swinging the world, oblivious to the quiet war that had just begun. I thought of Charles, his calm, his deliberate way of speaking. He used to say, "Justice doesn't shout Evie. It just waits long enough to be seen." I pulled my scarf tighter and walked into the snow each step, heavier but surer than the last. The real fight was only beginning, but at least now the ground beneath me was truth. The library in Albuquerque was the kind of place that smelled like forgotten decades, dust, old carpet, and the faint metallic tang of paper clips that had outlived everyone who used them. The ceiling lights hummed low above the rows of file cabinets, casting a sterile glow across the counters. I gave my name to the archivist, explaining I was searching for an original probate file belonging to my late husband, Charles Kerrigan. The woman looked up from her monitor, tapped a few keys, and returned with a file marked Kerrigan C. 2022, Probate Preliminary Draft. She slid a photocopy across the counter. The document was yellowed at the edges, a little grainy from age. My fingers hesitated before touching it. Near the bottom of the page, in Charles's familiar handwriting, was a line once reading, "For my wife, Evangeline Kerrigan." It had been crossed out in thick red ink. Next to it, in a shaky scrawl, someone had written, "Consult Aurelia." The words blurred for a second. It was his handwriting, his loops and pressure, but the strokes were uneven, trembling. This wasn't the confident signature of a man in control. It was the mark of someone whose hand had been guided or forced. My throat closed as I stared at it. Whoever had told him to write those words had known exactly what they were doing. Mrs. Kerrigan. A voice called softly behind me. I turned and saw a young woman holding a stack of folders, her expression uncertain. She was maybe 24, with brown hair tucked behind her ears and a nervous smile. "I'm sorry," she said. I couldn't help overhearing. "You said..." "Kerrigan, you're Evangeline." "Kerrigan." "Yes," I replied cautiously. She swallowed hard, then motioned toward the hallway. "Can we talk outside?" Her name was Myla Benton, a law student interning at the very firm Aurelia managed. She looked terrified, even saying her former employer's name. "I shouldn't even be telling you this," she whispered, glancing down the corridor. "But I was there the night the documents were finalized." My breath caught. "You mean the Sunday?" She nodded. "Aurelia asked me to stay late, said she needed a witness signature for Mr. Kerrigan's file. But when I came in, the office was dark, no one else there. She handed me a folder and said, "He just signed this. I need you to notarize the witness line." I never saw him. My hands trembled. "And you signed?" "I did," she admitted, guilt pressing her voice thin. "I didn't think. I was just an intern." But I kept the building's automatic security backup footage from that night. The cameras record continuously. I wasn't supposed to have access, but I saved a copy before they wiped the archives. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive, its plastic case cracked along the edge. It shows her alone in the conference room from 7:30 to 9:45. No one else enters. She's holding a pen, flipping through pages, signing something. Then she leaves. I stared at the drive like it might burn through my hand. Why keep this? Mila shrugged her eyes wet, because something about her scared me. She smiled too easily, like she knew everything would go her way. I asked if she would turn the footage over to my attorneys. She hesitated. If Aurelia finds out, she'll ruin me. I'm applying for my bar license next year. She could blacklist me before I even start. I'll protect you, I promised. Your name won't be mentioned until the court can shield it. But this could prove everything. She studied my face for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "Okay, I'll trust you." That evening, I left the library with the flash drive sealed in an envelope. Outside, the desert air bit through my coat. The wind howled down Central Avenue, carrying grit that stung my eyes. I checked into a small roadside inn near the edge of town and texted Nathan's secure contact to arrange delivery. A man in a gray coat came to the lobby an hour later. No questions asked. I handed him the envelope. When I returned to my room, I stood by the window watching the highway lights blur through the dust storm. A black SUV idled across the parking lot, its headlights faint but fixed on my window. I pulled the curtain shut, heart hammering, and sat on the bed. For the first time since Charles's death, I felt real fear, not of loss, but of being seen by the wrong eyes. Somewhere out there, Aurelia already knew I'd found someone who could undo her entire game. And now she'd be watching for my next move. The night of the gala felt like walking into a theater where every guest already knew their role. The hotel ballroom shimmered beneath chandeliers, the scent of wine and perfume heavy in the air. Outside, rain fell against the glass walls in thin silver lines, and the city lights bled into each droplet like melting gold. I arrived unannounced, dressed in the black gown Charles had bought me on our 35th anniversary, a small act of defiance wrapped in silk. The banner above the stage read, "Continuing His Legacy." Beneath it, Aurelia stood radiant and controlled, her hair swept back pearls glinting at her throat. She was shaking hands with donors, laughing in practiced bursts, her voice a polished performance of grief and gratitude. Every smile she gave looked rehearsed. I moved through the crowd, quietly nodding at faces I recognized from years of board dinners and charity events. Some looked surprised to see me, others pretended not to notice. My gaze drifted toward the auction display near the bar. That's when my stomach turned. There, under the soft glow of spotlights, sat a collection labeled Personal Mementos of Charles Kerrigan, a silver pen he used to sign every deal, his first blueprint sketches, and right in the center, framed behind glass, our wedding photograph, the same one that once sat on my nightstand. I walked up to the display, my pulse sharp in my throat. "Who provided these items?" I asked the attendant. "The Foundation's storage department," he replied casually. "Mrs. Sloan approved everything. Mrs. Sloan." The words hit like a slap. Before I could speak, a man approached a tall figure with gray hair and an easy familiarity. "Evangeline Kerrigan," he said, extending his hand. "It's been too long. It was Victor Ames, an old colleague of Charles's and a senior member of the Foundation board. I'm surprised," he said kindly. "I thought you were still co-trustee." Across the room, Aurelia's head turned slightly. For the briefest second, her smile flickered. Then she lifted her champagne and laughed at something the chairman beside her said, as if nothing had happened. But I saw the tension in her shoulders. She hadn't told them I'd been cut out. A familiar voice murmured behind me. "You picked a hell of a night to show up." I turned to see Harper Ruiz in a dark red coat, holding a thin envelope. She slid it into my hand discreetly. "Don't open it here," she said. "Those are bank records transfers totaling $3.5 million to a shell company called Cypress and Wren, offshore accounts. They've been moving assets for months." I clenched the envelope. "Is it enough if you can tie it to misuse of charitable funds?" She said. "Clause E12 will trigger automatically. The foundation goes under independent audit, and Aurelia loses everything she's stolen." I nodded, words caught behind my teeth. Minutes later, Aurelia took the stage, the room dimmed spotlights framing her like a halo. "Family," she began, her voice honeyed and hollow, "is not about blood. It's about vision, the shared dream of creating something that outlives us." Polite applause rippled through the audience. She smiled, glancing over the crowd, her eyes grazing mine for a single, cutting instant. She continued, "Charles Kerrigan taught us that legacy is not built on ownership, but on stewardship. And tonight we honor that stewardship." My hands tightened around the envelope. Stewardship. That was the word Charles had used in his notes to describe what we built together. Hearing it spill from her mouth made something inside me harden. The speech ended with a toast. People clapped, glasses chimed, cameras flashed. Then just as she stepped down from the podium, a waiter whispered something in her ear. Her smile froze mid-air. She nodded once abruptly, then excused herself toward the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear. I didn't need to guess. The Denver court had just approved Nadia's motion. The foundation's accounts, her accounts were frozen. Outside, the rain had turned heavier, drumming against the glass in furious rhythm. I slipped out through the side exit, the envelope clutched to my chest. The wind was cold, but I felt steady for the first time in months. Across the street, the reflection of the hotel shimmered on the wet pavement, its letters warped and broken by puddles. Legacy, trust, truth. The three words rippled together until they became one. As I walked toward my car, my heels splashing through the water, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Everything that mattered, the love, the truth, the name he refused to let them erase, was finally surfacing. Clause E12 was more than a clause. It was Charles's final way of saying, "I'm still here, Evie. Keep going." The Thursday sky over Denver was the color of steel cold and unmoving when I walked into the new Kerrigan-Myers Foundation offices inside Union Station. The place was glass and silence, every wall reflective, every breath monitored by invisible cameras. On the long, polished table sat 12 nameplates, 12 glasses of water, and a brass plaque that read, "Executive Transition Meeting." I took my seat at the far end. From where I sat, I could see my reflection small and steady, framed by the city lights behind me. Aurelia Sloan sat at the head of the table, poised and immaculate. Her hair was perfectly sculpted, her lipstick too calm for the storm about to come. Nathan and Nadia were on my left, Victor Ames beside Aurelia, his reading glasses folded on a stack of reports. The board members murmured politely, shuffling papers. Then the door closed with a hollow click. "Thank you all for being here." Aurelia began, her voice smooth as oil. "We gather today to honor Charles Kerrigan's legacy, to ensure his work continues under clear, unified leadership." She glanced at me just long enough to acknowledge my existence, then returned to her script. Charles believed in evolution, not preservation. It's time the foundation moves forward. I sat still, my fingers resting on the sealed envelope inside my purse. The weight of it pulsed against my palm. When she finished her speech, she turned her attention down the table. "And before we proceed to the vote of succession, I'd like to extend a personal note of gratitude to Mrs. Evangeline Kerrigan for her years of support and patience." Her smile was soft but cold, the kind you give to someone you've already buried. I rose from my chair. "Before you vote," I said evenly, "there are a few documents you might want to see." The room went silent. Even the hum of the ceiling lights seemed to pause. I walked slowly toward Victor and handed him the envelope. He looked at me, then at Aurelia before opening it. One by one, the papers spread across the table like quiet detonations. The first was a printed report from Dr. Dean Harrow confirming that 2 weeks before the supposed signing of the will, Charles had lost control of his dominant hand due to neural deterioration. The second was the email. Remove co-beneficiary privileges per revision. The third, an extracted video frame from security footage showing Aurelia alone in the office on that Sunday night, pen in hand signing something that should never have been hers. Victor's face drained of color. "Aurelia," he said softly, "you were alone." "That's absurd," she snapped. "You think I forged my own father-in-law's signature?" Nadia leaned forward, flipping through the pages. "Clause E12, she said, tapping the document. "Mr. Kerrigan's safeguard clause. It mandates an internal suspension and reauthorization process if tampering is detected. Every action after that is null until review." Aurelia gave a sharp laugh that cracked under its own weight. "This is nonsense. It's an old draft. None of this is binding." I met her eyes. "Then you won't mind if the board verifies it." Victor stood, clearing his throat. "According to the bylaws, we are required to review any contested material before proceeding. The clause appears valid." He turned to Nathan. "Mr. Lowell, can you authenticate this?" Nathan nodded once. "These are original signatures, and the footage metadata aligns with the night of the document upload." The air tightened. I could hear someone's pen clatter to the table. Aurelia reached for the folder, but Nadia blocked her hand. "You'll refrain from touching foundation property until legal review is complete." "This is an ambush," Aurelia hissed. "You think you can humiliate me in front of my board?" I stepped closer. "No, Aurelia. This isn't humiliation. It's correction." The silence that followed was long and absolute. For the first time, she had no mask to hide behind. Victor finally spoke. "The vote is suspended. An internal audit will begin immediately. Until then, all authority transitions are frozen. Mrs. Kerrigan's role as co-trustee is reinstated provisionally." Aurelia gathered her notes, trembling. "You can't do this." "We already have," Nadia said quietly. Nathan gestured toward the door. "By regulation, you're not permitted to remove any files from this building until the court concludes its review." Aurelia's heels clicked sharply as she turned and stormed toward the exit. The door shut behind her with a clean, final sound. When the meeting adjourned, no one spoke. Victor placed the documents back into the envelope and handed them to me. "You were right," he said simply. "He left something for you. Something no one could erase." Outside, snow had begun to fall, thin white flakes drifting through the Denver air like ash. I walked down the station steps, the city spread wide and gray before me. There was no victory, no celebration, only a quiet release. The balance had shifted, and for the first time since his death, I felt Charles beside me again, steady watching, waiting for me to finish what he began. 2 months later, spring returned to Santa Fe. The air carried the scent of rain-soaked earth and new grass. In the center of the community park stood the restored Kerrigan-Myers Scholarship Garden rows of daffodils and sunflowers planted by volunteers from the local college. The morning light stretched long across the courtyard, warm and patient. The Denver court had ruled 2 weeks earlier the contested will was invalid. The original document was reinstated along with my lifelong co-trustee status. Aurelia had quietly resigned, citing health reasons and respect for the foundation's reputation. The newspapers called it an elegant retreat, but those who read between the lines knew better. I didn't ask for restitution or lawsuits. I wanted transparency. Every record, every signature, every memo Charles ever wrote would now live in the Foundation's public archive, a place no one could edit in the dark again. Nathan and Nadia helped organize the reopening ceremony. Victor Ames stood at the podium, his voice steady as he read from a small note. In honor of those who guard the truth quietly, he said, unveiling a stone plaque beneath the main archway. The crowd applauded softly. I sat in the front row, feeling the weight of sunlight across my hands. Among the guests was Mila Benton, standing near the edge of the crowd in a pale blue dress, her eyes glassy with disbelief that she was even there. Harper Ruiz filmed from a distance, capturing every moment for her final feature article. Neither of them sought credit. They just wanted the story to end cleanly without fear. When the students began planting the first rows of daffodils, I walked between them, helping pat down the soil. The sound of shovels meeting earth felt like a heartbeat returning. Each flower would grow from ground once buried in deceit. Now it would bloom with names restored. Nathan approached with a small sealed envelope. "We found this in Charles's private files," he said. "He must have written it years ago." I opened it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. "If they ever erase your name from paper, Evie, let your work write it back. Legacy isn't a title, it's what grows after you're gone." Tears came quiet and clean. I folded the letter and slipped it into my coat pocket. As the afternoon turned gold, Harper came over and said softly, "My article's going live tomorrow. They're reopening the investigation into the offshore accounts. Looks like justice finally caught up." I nodded, not triumphant, only grateful. Later, Mila joined me by the garden gate. "They gave me the first scholarship," she said, almost whispering, "for ethics in law. They're naming it after Charles." I smiled. He would have liked that. The sun began to dip behind the hills, turning everything copper and soft. The laughter of students carried across the courtyard, mixing with the hum of bees and the rustle of new leaves. I wandered toward the memorial stone and traced the engraved words with my fingertips. "In honor of those who guard the truth quietly." For so long I had lived in the shadow of loss, first of love, then of dignity, then of trust. But standing there, I felt no anger, left only peace. Charles had always said legacy wasn't about what you keep. It's about what you leave standing after everything else falls. That evening in the old adobe house overlooking the valley, I poured tea and watched sunlight fade through the window panes. The world outside glowed soft and endless. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes sang faintly in the warm breeze. The fight was over. The truth, slow but certain, had arrived. And as the last of the light touched the hills, I whispered, "You kept your promise, Charles. You made sure I never disappeared. No applause, no victory parade, just the simple, unshakable quiet of justice finally at rest."